when your friend was here, oh gosh, why can't I remember her name? Um, when she was here for the last one, um, she started the recording while we were still talking about no, you started the recording while we were still talking about let's just say Army Hammer. And and then I was like, we're not recording, are we? And yes, we were. And then at the end, both of us went to stop the recording, which meant that we had two recordings, and one is like a minute because we were like, why is it still recording? It's because both of us went to stop it at the same time, and one of us stopped it and the other one started it. So it's good that you're here and know what you're doing. All right, so let's get started and welcome everybody. Our two guests and our welcome to our movie discussion. We are going to discuss the movie Milk today. Um, I'm Dr. Karen Wisely. I'm at the Northeast campus. I'm here with Dr. Chloe Northrop from the Connect campus. Samantha Elkins is also from the Northeast campus, and right now Mao Garza is an adjunct for us at the Northeast campus and a new internet star. But we'll talk about that in a minute. How I like to introduce these movie topics is to read the log line and then tell you where you may have seen the stars of this. And there are a lot of stars in this movie. The log line for Milk is the story of Harvey Milk and his struggles as an American gay activist who fought for gay rights and became California's first openly gay elected official. And it doesn't give anything away, but we will. So use this as your spoiler alert. We are going to talk about this movie because it's based on history, and you should already probably know that Harvey Milk is dead. Um, it stars Sean Penn as Harvey Milk. He won an Academy Award for this role. You may know Sean Penn as Jeff Spicoli in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, or in Dead Man Walking, or from Mystic River, which he won his first Academy Award for. Or if you're like me, a Gen Xer, you know Sean Penn as Madonna's first ex-husband. Josh Brolin was Dan White. You probably know him as Thanos from the last few Avenger movies. He was in a lot of other things too, but it's also important to mention he's Barbara Streisand's stepson. Um, Emil Hirsch as Cleve Jones. You may know him from Speed Racer or Into the Wild. He also is he's not been canceled because he still works, but he has been in a lot of controversy for the past few years because of some very unsavory behavior. I looked at the unsavory behavior last night so that I would know what it was, and ew. Could I just say ew? Shame on you, Emil Hirsch. Diego Luna as Jack Lyra. You possibly know him from Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Yeah, that was a pretty big movie. Okay, I can't believe everybody hasn't seen it. James Franco as Scott Smith. You know him from his Oscar-nominated turn in that 127 Hours movie where he stuck under a rock and cut his own arm off. Was it arm? It was arm, right? Yeah, okay. Or with any Seth Rogen stoner movies like Pineapple Express and This Is the End. Allison Pill as Anne Cronenberg. She's the kind of token lesbian that none of them really trust when she first comes in. And she was in the HBO series Newsroom and a whole bunch of other stuff. I started rewatching that recently. It's good. And finally, Victor Garber as Mayor George Moscone. He played Jennifer Garner's father in Alias, which is how I know him. Milk was directed by Gus Van Sant and released in 2008. It won Academy Awards for Best Actor for Sean Penn and Best Original Screenplay for Dustin Lance Black. Dustin Lance Black, you may know him for being married to British gold medal diver Tom Daley.
And they're always so sweet at the Olympics when they like supporting each other.
Yeah, yeah. And I think they have 2 children now, because I think they just had another one. So they're just a happy little couple. And Tom Daley knits a lot, and he knit a little cozy for his gold medal, which is hilarious. But anyway, all right. So it was released in 2008. I think when I say the Gus Van Sant, I never sound more Midwestern than I do when I say that name. So um, anyway, all right. So what do we think of this movie? What are your thoughts? Anybody want to start this off?
I'm unmuted, so I'll go right ahead.
Okay.
To be honest, had not seen the entire movie before I watched it for this. I remember it coming out. I remember hearing a lot about it. And I was just starting graduate school then, and I didn't have money to go see movies. I didn't have streaming back then. And so I remember, because this is when I first started graduate school. And so I kind of like I missed it, and I've been, it comes on again and everything. So I was kind of wondering how it would be, and especially because it is now 15 years old, would it seem dated in a way? Because life was a little, 15 years is not an insignificant amount of time. And I was actually surprised with how many really younger actors who are still very active, I would say. And like we see a lot of people who you recognize in other things. But also I thought of how it's still so timely, and it's still a good movie, I would say, 15 years later. And not a lot of movies, I would say, maybe from that time period have aged as well, in my opinion. And I would love to know what you all think about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it has held up pretty well. You can hear me, right? Yeah. Okay. All right. I was using the mute on my microphone, and I didn't know if it was off. But yeah, I think it has aged pretty well, and I think in some ways it's unfortunate that it's aged pretty well, because I think that a lot of the messages from this movie are relevant still today, and I think that that's probably a sad commentary on our society, that it is so relevant. It was made 15 years ago, and 15 years ago it was a movie about something that happened 40 years before that. And the fact that the themes and the events are still relevant in 2023, from something that happened more than 50 years ago, um, or not quite 50 years ago, I guess. I'm doing math in my head. It's maybe not the best commentary for our society right now. Um, I think that it is beautifully acted. I think it is a beautifully made film. I think that there's a lot of really good actors. I think the director is great. I think the screenplay was really great. I think it's, as far as accuracy historically, it's on point. Um, I really like this movie a lot. This is one of my favorite, like, historically based movies because of how well it's done. Um, so that's my thought. How about you, Samantha? What do you have?
Well, I was going to add to that because, like, there is something about that how well it is made from like a film perspective. I think one reason that it's aged so well, not as just because the poignancy, but how they filmed it, that they were really, really good with all the costuming, all the setting, all of that. I've been loving these movies for like setting alone, that I'm like, yes, if you want a good visual representation of like the sexual revolution of the 70s and like gay actors, this, you should watch this. Like, even if you're looking at nitpicky, like problematic things, overall the setting and how it's filmed, and the fact that I'm gonna just say, I really, really love when these kinds of biopics include actual historic footage in them. And this one has actual historic footage of like the rounding up of different gay groups in the back of police cars, and like they're packing them in like sardines and everything like that. And you go, oh my gosh, this, you know, and I think that's so important to see that visually, because I can talk about it all day in my class, but like that, you don't get the same feeling from it. And so
Yeah,
I think that's one reason it's aged so well.
yes, and I brought up right before we all met, I saw a musical this last week and called Parade, and it's a revival, and they did the same thing with that. So I felt like it was interesting to see these two kind of interesting, I say, portrayals of something historical. And on stage, they actually, the back screen had photographs then of newspaper like headlines that were going on at the time, and of the actual as someone would come up to sing a song, the actual historical person. So it's interesting to me to see a kind of similarity of that as well, of being true to a historical story. Whereas obviously a musical is taking more liberties. This seemed to even be so much more accurate. And what I like too is I think some of the movies we've talked about this semester, they sometimes compile different characters together and it's like a composite person. I didn't feel like I saw that in here. What did you think, Dr. Wisely, about that? Because I feel like that's something we've talked about several times, that this isn't like a representation of several people, thinking back to like Judgment at Nuremberg and some of those other movies we've talked about. And was that the case here? Because it didn't seem to be.
No, these were the actual people. And so yeah, it is none of that composite characters. And for the main part, they stay really true to what's to the actual events. And I it's based this movie was based on, and the screenplay was based on a documentary film called The Times of Harvey Milk, which premiered in 1984. um, and it was written by or it was based off of a book called The Mayor of Castro Street: The Life and Times of Harvey Milk, that was published in 1982, made written by Randy Schultz. So it's the it's subject matter is very well documented. You could see at the end of the movie too. At the beginning, they show the bar raids and things like that, but at the end of the movie, they actually showed the footage of Milk in some of those marches. um and you could see, like, it was at some points it was hard. They were so right on with costuming, right on with everything. It was hard to tell the difference between the real footage with Harvey Milk and the filmed footage with Sean Penn as Harvey Milk. And and I'm really not surprised he won an Academy Award for that, because it was so well done. um so it is, if I think that if I'm ever asked, and I have been multiple times, what is the most historically accurate movie that you've ever seen, I usually come down to this one, because it is so right on and almost shot for shot from the documentary. And so it's outstanding, and the people in it are actual people. You know, like Anne Cronenberg. I think when we were recording the podcast version of this, I said I think Anna Cronenberg was had died. Well, she hasn't. That was a mistake. She hasn't died. She is still living loud and strong, and still an activist, and still doing things in the community. And so all of these people were real people. Many of them have passed on, because, shortly after Harvey Milk, within like 5 years of his death, AIDS came to the community. But um, they are real people, and it's fairly accurate. So I have nothing but good things to say about the movie from an accuracy point of view. Um, I think that it's like I said, the importance of the topic right now, as things are, we're firmly in a backlash kind of stage in our in this social movement, that it's really important. A couple of themes, and the first one being Harvey Milk's being out, and how very he was very forceful about everyone on his team being out, because it is important. So representation matters, and I know this is something that we've seen um, a lot um, about this. About the various movies that we have talked about, that representation matters, but it does. And it's true in movies and media, but it's also true in life. There was a movement a few years ago whenever there were high suicide rates, um, called the "It Gets Better" movement, and the idea is that adult LGBT people would speak out and try to tell younger people that it gets better, that you feel like you're alone, and you feel like you're it's life is terrible when you're young and a teenager, and people might be picking on you and all of these kind of things, but it does get better, because at some point you will meet people who love you for you, and and you can build a life. And in order to have a movement like that, you have to have people who are willing to be out and to be examples for younger LGBT people coming up, and just saying, I mean, I'm living an all right life. You know, I have a good job. I have all these books, and um, my cat likes me usually if I feed her. Where'd she go? I don't even know where she is right now. But and everything is it's a pretty good life. So giving people hope, which is the other thing that Harvey Milk leaves people with, even at the end of this movie when he is dead, the the reading that he said is you have to give people hope. And those are two very important things. Being out if you can, and having hope. Without hope, uh, you know, what are we?
So this obviously had Harvey Milk starting when he was 40. And my question is, he was out at this point, but many people were pointing out to him that he had not been for his whole life, and that for the younger members of the group and for other people, it might be more difficult for them. What do you have to say about that? I mean, again, because I'm looking at you who are you even 40 yet, Karen? But still, in that position where there could be some similarities of being in a privileged position, of having a job and having these things. What would you have to say to younger people then who might have the same questions that they were asking Harvey Milk?
Yeah, and he didn't come out until later, and but a lot of that was the times then too, and it is a very personal choice for anyone who is coming out, to decide when and to whom they have that discussion, and it is something that you need to weigh your options with. If you are a young person who lives at home and you know that your parents are not going to support you, or you're pretty sure that they're not, then maybe you don't want to come out because you might be kicked out of your home. You might, have to find a new place to live. You might, and if you don't have the resources for that, then it might be easier for you for a while to stay closeted. And that's that's hard. It isn't like, oh, that's the easy way out, because it is difficult to be closeted. It is not revealing your true self to people. It is not being able to be yourself around certain people. And it's always having to, kind of police your pronouns and that kind of thing, Um it's very difficult decision. So it's never, like, oh, you're taking the easy way out, because no, there is no easy way out in this. Coming out is hard because you're making yourself vulnerable to people, and you're asking people to accept you for who you are. Staying in the closet is hard because you are not able to be who you are. And so neither one is easy, but if you are able to, if it is, if you are, if you are living on your own, if you have really supportive family, and your family like can tell you, um, in roundabout ways whether they're supportive. I know you and I have had discussions about that, Chloe, but like, well, my mom, I never wanted to tell my mom because my mom was deeply religious, and so my mom would tell me stories about some of her friends' kids. And like one of her friends' kids died of AIDS, and my mom, told me, like, I didn't know this woman. I didn't know who her friend was. I'd never met her kid. And she's telling me, oh, so and so. I'm like, no, I don't. But, and then she would tell me who it is. And she's like, her son, And I'm like, no, I don't know who he is. And she would tell me all about him, only to tell me that he died of AIDS. And I'm like, Mom, why are you telling me this? And she's like, well, I just think it's terrible that he never told his mom because he thought that she wouldn't love him after that. And I just hope that any kid of mine would know that I would love them no matter what. And which was not a discussion about me, but she was trying to tell me, it's okay to tell me. And parents do that, and family members do that. So you kind of have an idea, and if you are comfortable with that, then be out. If you are on your own and you feel comfortable being out, be out. But if you feel like it's not time, then don't be, or be selectively out. Tell your closest friend, tell your, someone that will support you no matter what, because that's important. You need support. You need your people around you.
I think that that was one of the more powerful parts of the movie for me, was the young gentleman in the wheelchair who called Harvey
Mhm.
Milk at the earlier in the movie and then later in the movie. And when Harvey's like, get out, run as fast as you can. And I was like, I can't, and I just felt like that was a really powerful scene. And the poignancy of that to me was, I think what you're saying is, in some places, it some families are very supportive, and that would be, but even still today in many places, it's might be not possible, especially for people who are more vulnerable into being reliant on family members or jobs or whatever these situations are. So I
Mhm.
felt like the sadness of that part was not only the historical accuracy of that, but the continued relevancy of it for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's yeah, I mean, we're seeing it now in places like, Florida, for Florida, really for all LGBT people and for trans people all over this country. There are so many anti-trans bills that are being passed all over that make it hard to impossible for them to have gender affirming care legally. And so it's difficult, but it is important to the longevity and the long run success of a social movement that people be able to identify the members of that social movement. And for LGBT movement, that is the hardest part, because that means we have to be out. Some of us have to be out. Some of us have to be able to be interviewed on television or radio or what have you, and let other people know, hey, it can be okay. You can survive, you can thrive, and you just have to find the right people to be around you and be supportive. And so I think that's kind of the message here, is that's what he's wanting to do as a supervisor in San Francisco, is have like a platform where he can show people all across the country, because he was the first. He was a big news item, and people across the country heard about him and saw that, oh hey, um I swear to God, little, if you parrot me, I'm probably gonna kill you. um my cat sometimes likes to uh climb on my shoulder, anyway, or just scratch down my back. And but it's important to have people that you can look up to. It has always been. And, you know, like I'm obviously by far the oldest person in this room. And so I'll tell you that when I was growing up, there weren't. You know, I mean, there were people that we thought were gay, like Freddie Mercury, but Freddie Mercury never came out while he was alive. And so, you know, and there were, you know, and then Melissa Etheridge came out and it was like, whoa, you know, and it mattered. Ellen came out and she was blacklisted, and it matters so much. So it's an important theme in this movie. It's an important theme in the movement. It's important to people's lives that happened. Um, I had a student last year who who really got upset at the end of the LGBT lecture that I was giving about milk whenever he found out that he died. And that is very upsetting, right? But he's like, "Oh man, how could you do that?" And again, it's the ebb and flow, it's the ups and downs, peaks and valleys of social movements. It's never a straight line. There's always backlash. But it is very it's very abrupt how this happens, and it is, of course, and it always seems like it is when things are finally going really well for him and he's super happy and he's just chatting with people, and then Dan White is like, "Hey, can you come in here for a minute?" And then, you know, shoots and kills him, and it's very sad, very upsetting. And it is, you know, I feel bad for my students because we all have to learn that, you know, backlash comes, and I try to teach them. I try to explain to them that there will be backlash. So whenever something good happens, just you just hold on tight with both hands because something bad's gonna follow it, and just get ready for it, right? So even that, I feel like they displayed great. The opera thing. Uh, are any of us opera aficionados in this chat?
I enjoy opera, but I don't know about aficionado.
Well, you that puts you one step above me already. And um um that was, I think, that was added material from going from the life of Harvey Milk, or the times of Harvey Milk, whatever, the times of Harvey Milk, the documentary film, to Milk, the movie. um that's something that was added, the connection to that opera across the way whenever he turns after the first shot and sees that and hears the opera music and all of that. That was something that was added, and I am not familiar with enough with opera to really know uh, that particular one or what music it was, and I'm sure that it had great meaning, but it's completely lost on me because opera is not one of my languages. Anybody?
Mike. Oh, okay. I don't know a lot about opera, but I do know that a lot of operas are tragic, and so it's kind of like, I think, Shakespearean tragedy kind of thing. Is a lot of that implication there, more so than anything else, and a lot of it, I think, is just that coalescence into that emotional moment. Because I know that I felt that. Like, I'm like, I'm not a big opera person per se, but I do know that, like, in that moment when the opera like starts like surging, I'm like even more so in that.
Yeah.
Just, yeah.
Yes. Well, I thought it was Tosca, so I wanted to make sure that it was before, so I just Googled it.
Mhm.
But that's a Puccini opera, and it is, yes, it premiered in 1900, and it is a tragedy. And I feel like I've actually seen Tosca before at Fort Worth, but it was years and years ago. And yeah, so according to Wikipedia, it has depictions of torture, murder, and suicide. So yes, all the things all there together, which again, I would say in many ways mirrors, we see all of those themes then in this movie as well. So it would be interesting to see if that was actually playing in San Francisco at the time, or if they used that as just a kind of a metaphor then for what we see in the movie here, which obviously, if just a few scenes before, we see that horrific suicide that was in there as well. And what an absolute tragedy to have to deal with that. I mean, just to experience that really for Harvey Milk.
And then Dan White also, I can't remember, did they say in the credits or not? But I know in history, Dan White came back a few years later after serving his jail sentence for manslaughter, which I'm sure we can talk about more. But he's commit suicide as well.
Yes.
Hey, Samantha, we all turned on our cameras, so I think you should too.
Wait, her camera is on.
What?
Her camera is on.
Samantha's is?
Yeah,
Samantha
I see
is. Mine is.
Well, I can't see her.
I see Samantha, myself, and Karen right now. Yes, I see us all.
I was gonna say, I don't see you, Chloe, so.
Oh, I see myself. Maybe that's just that maybe we don't see it all with the views.
Okay, maybe. Okay. Sorry,
We'll
Samantha.
It's like, I still have mine on. It's been on this whole time.
But there's actually a operawire.com saying that Harvey Milk is a 20th century Tosca. So I'll post that link right here as that comparison there. I have a friend from high school who is an opera singer and goes all around the world now to do this. So I do keep up a little bit with the opera world because of that, because it's really fascinating, really, to see all the different, how do people memorize these operas? That's what I find really fascinating too. But it's interesting to see historical characters maybe mirroring or at least representing. So it's interesting to bring up those similarities, and good job, Dr. Weissley, of picking that up, because it was something I saw in there and I wanted to look up more, and then I forgot.
Yeah. Well, I've always felt like, I'm like, that's probably way more important than I think it is.
It's not a random choice.
I have no idea.
It's an intentional choice there. So I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I was going to add to some of the stuff that you guys were saying earlier about like coming out. And one thing that I really enjoyed about the movie is it showed the nuance of Harvey Milk's character, because so often we have this problem in history that we like sanctify certain individuals or demonize other individuals and everything like that. And Harvey Milk, we really did get this movie. One reason it's so good and so historically accurate is they do a pretty nuanced approach to him, kind of showing us that like that he's a little bit forceful with trying to get people to come out, and partly you understand the movement, but then he was also willing to multiple times put his life on the line, and then, you know, in the end he does die. So I thought it did just a really good job of that.
Stranger in the end. And that's what I thought is interesting to point out. It was somebody who did know him and someone who had a personal experience with him. And I thought that was an interesting aspect, that it wasn't in the end the strangers on the street and the people who were sending the hate mail. It's kind of an insidious thing that's growing from within in some ways, that I thought was a good an interesting aspect, historically speaking, and one that, if this was a fictional thing, would that have been the character? And maybe that is part of the whole like comparison with an opera, because I think you're afraid of the external threats, but you don't always think about the ones that are internal. And I think that makes this maybe more of this like opera tragedy kind of thing as well, that it ends up being somebody who should have been a colleague, perhaps even a friend. Yeah.
Well, and you see that like that Harvey Milk, he's political in everything he does. He's so deliberate in some of his actions. And so there's this element of like, he goes to Dan White's, was it his son or his daughter that's getting baptized?
His baby.
It's his baby. It's a baby. It's a baby. Whatever. There's a baby. It's getting baptized. And Harvey Milk is the only one of all the colleagues to show up. And so you get this kind of element of like, attempting friendship, but also like Harvey Milk's very aware of that, like this can serve a political agenda to a certain extent, that he's very calculated in a lot of the things he does, but he also is so good with like coming across as not calculated per se.
And one thing too about the calculation of Harvey Milk that I thought about you, Dr. Weissley, in your research, the kind of clothing transformation that milk undergoes as well. And I was thinking about your own research about the suits and everything. So can you share a little bit about that with us? Because it was something that I actually I had on my notes to talk to you about, and the significance then of sartorial decisions when it comes to these kind of movements and representation and all of those things.
Yeah, it's in my research. I looked at what we called the Dallas Way, which is basically changing the system from within the system. So it is it doesn't require a whole lot of protest. It requires people putting on suits and ties and going and talking to the people who are able to make decisions, and then having them, you know, having conversations with them that will make them change policy. And it is a different type of social movement than we have normally seen with the LGBT movement, because a lot of it has been with protest and out in the streets, and people, you know, dressing, let's say casually, and sometimes very dressy, but with let's say gender non-conforming ways, and it's very forceful, it's very in your face, and it's very aggressive to the policymakers. And so sometimes there are other groups who will try to be more conservative, more palatable to the policymakers, and it involves, dressing up in a suit. And so initially, Harvey Milk gains the support of his community by being one of those rabble rousers, by having the bullhorn and standing up on the soapbox, which they labeled as soapbox, right? Um and giving speeches and wearing the clothing, the attire that they wore in the bars, and then in order to get change through the county supervisor, the board of supervisors, I should say, is he has to dress up and get a haircut and wear a suit and be able to fit in with those folks, so that he can convince those people to help his people. And so it is two sides of the coin. And you see this a lot in social movements, where there are more radical organizations and then there are more conservative organizations. The conservative organizations often get criticized for being conservative, and the radical, organizations are like, you're making things difficult for us. But the harsh reality of it is the best social movements have both of those sides, can work both of those sides. Because if people aren't a little bit scared of what might happen if they don't affect change and allow people to have rights, then they might not be willing to negotiate in order to get those rights. So I when we talk about this in class, I always ask my students, a trick question, and that is, which is more important? Is it the radical groups, or is it the conservative groups? And the trick of the question is, it's yes. And if you know me, you know that answering yes to a multiple choice question is one of my pet peeves, and it makes my brain explode. But the answer here is yes. You need both of those groups. Martin Luther King Jr. was out there putting bodies on the line, and it wasn't radical because he was committed to nonviolence, but he was out there, and it brought a reaction. And by putting your bodies on the line, it allowed organizations like the NAACP to go and negotiate and be seen as, oh, this is reasonable, let's just change this rule. So and it's the same when Martin Luther King Jr.'s group then began to seem less radical, then you get the Black Panther Party, and everyone's like, ugh. And, and then they're willing to look at Martin Luther King and say, what can we do to make you guys' life easier? And Harvey Milk personifies, I think, both sides of that in one human being, because he starts out by gaining his community's acceptance and respect by being one of them, and then he changes abruptly, puts on that suit, gets the haircut, and goes and talks on their behalf to the people who can make things happen. So yeah, that's sort of my research, and yeah, it's very well on display right here. So
Well, and
yeah.
I was going to say, there's the one scene that he literally gets them to march towards the city hall, but he races ahead of them, gets all like fixed up, and like stops the like, I don't know, potential violence.
Yeah, he uses Cleve Jones to. He's like, here, take my bullhorn. You've seen me do it a million times. Get them going, and then I will come to the rescue. And then these guys will realize they need to negotiate with me unless they want to have to deal with you. And yeah, it is a great example of how you need both radical groups and people that fit within the system to affect change. Yeah.
Ah, it does really, really good showing those two sides and how they can be really the two sides to the same coin.
Mhm.
Oh, I think we got a question.
All right, Mauricio, go ahead.
Well, it was more of like a follow-up, I guess, to your point about the radical and the conservatives, because I think that, oh, hold on, sorry. So sorry about that. I think that, like, you know, me and my partner are both immigrants, and we've kind of talked about, like, you know, working really hard to try to lose our accent because, you know, and where we grew up, an accent could get you killed, an accent could get you harmed. And sometimes there's this radical movement of like, no, you should proudly pronounce things a certain way and do things a certain way. And I like that this movie showed both of embracing both sides, because there are situations where you should be very open and proud about stuff like that. And there's other situations where it could bring you, I don't want to say unnecessary, but, you know, maybe like unnecessary harm, you know. And I think a lot of times when looking at the conservative branches of things, we kind of lose sight of, a lot of times it's like pragmatism too, right? Where, you know, it's like, I didn't have the privilege of being able to, you know, walk around and say things and do things like that, because it could have actually gotten me killed. That's all. The end of rant.
Yeah. Yeah. Good rant. And this is a fight that is ongoing in the LGBT community about, say, pride events, because pride events um are supposed to be a a time, a place, an event where you can be your true, authentic, weird self. And that means, you know, there's going to be some, you know, like nudity and, you know, some, you know, things that are going to offend certain people. But that is supposed to be the beauty that is pride events. And you know, and then you have within the same community, you have people who are like, "Ugh, I wish they wouldn't be so flamboyant." We're trying to fit in, and we're trying to show that we are, you know, just like everybody else. And, you know, and then these guys dress up in uh my favorite, assless chaps, which all chaps are assless, but regardless. Um and walk down the street, and it's just it's obscene. And it's like, but that's when you're allowed to do that. That's when you're supposed to be allowed to do that. And if people are going to judge the entirety of the LGBT community based on the most flamboyant, outrageous costumes at a pride parade, I mean, that's not a problem for our community. That's a problem for everybody else, because a lot of straight people are going to pride parades nowadays, and they're doing it like they would go to a zoo, you know, to see the exhibits, they're not interested in learning about us and learning about our history and learning about our lives and how we feel about, like being in danger and being scared sometimes and not being able to hold your girlfriend's hand walking down the street or any of these things. They're not interested in that. They're coming there to see the flamboyant, outrageous people and then to say, oh, those people are terrible. And so it is two sides of the same coin, and it is so controversial in so many different ways. But part of, I've always said that, I always like kind of make fun a little bit of the heteronormativity that has developed in my community, in that, like everybody, we go through all this fight to be equal and to be respected as equals, and then everybody seems to want to get married and have kids just like everybody else, and it's like those those drag queens did not throw rocks at the Stonewall Inn so that you can get married and have kids and live in a suburb just like everyone else. We're supposed to be able to live our authentic selves and not have to, and so I don't know. It is a fight that is ongoing. I enjoy it. I can see both sides of it, but I'm a historian, so I get to do that.
But isn't that kind of the beauty of it, that there are so many? I mean, it is a spectrum of existence, right? It is.
Yeah, I know.
So,
I just like to tease my friends.
right. One question I also had, a lot of when we think about the gay rights movement, and we think also about how it's portrayed on film and for TV shows, for series, for movies, a lot of focus has been, I would say, on the AIDS crisis. And so to see something from, let's say, the decade before, I think was really fascinating. And again, I hate to bring up Parade again, but I feel like we see a lot about the Holocaust, and this was something in 1915. And so to me, there were so many interesting parallels with that, to see something in America and see anti-Semitism so prevalent in America in the 1915s on stage. And then to see this movie that again is like a little bit before, and yet to see so many of those characters then involved in that for the Names Project specifically. I was just teaching, I taught a history of art class this semester, and this last week we got it to the 80s, and I started talking about in productions of art, and we talked about the AIDS quilt. So can you tell us a little bit more about the Names Project and about how that came about and how, like, the tie-ins with this movie as well, Karen?
Yeah,
I like to
absolutely.
put you on the spot because I wanted to know also more about this.
It's all right. I knew that this would be one of those where I am like dominating conversation because this is kind of my area of expertise. Yeah, the AIDS quilt, the Names Project AIDS Memorial Quilt is directly out of Cleve Jones. And Cleve Jones is still around. Check on him every now and again. He's getting a little bit older now. He is still around. He's still an activist. And he continued Harvey Milk's legacy in San Francisco. And every year they would have a march in honor of Harvey Milk. And in the 80s into the 90s, it was becoming evident that people who had been to every march then were missing. And the reason that they were missing is because they had gotten sick and died from AIDS. And so what happens in mid to late 1980s is that on one of these marches, Cleve Jones asked the marchers, because they were missing so many of the regular people and seeing familiar faces, he asked the marchers to turn their placards over and write on the back of it um, the names of the people who had died of AIDS. And then when they made it to the federal building in San Francisco, they taped them up on the side of the building, and someone remarked that it looked like a quilt, like a patchwork quilt. And so Cleve Jones then got the idea of, this is how communities mourn. And Um, and and it's important that communities are allowed to mourn, which is something that we need to probably start thinking about someday about COVID. And the literally million people, more than a million people who died of that. But so they made this uh, AIDS quilt, and they asked people to submit a block, and it's a rectangular block. The blocks are rectangular. They're supposed to be 3 feet by 6 feet, and that is to that is roughly the size of a coffin. And you can design it in any way for in memory of any person that you've lost, or a group of people, or there are organizations, there are communities who design them and just put names, all the names of their people that died on them. There are thousands, tens of thousands of these quilt blocks, and you can search them online. The Names Project AIDS Quilt has a website, and you can search them by either by the name of the person, by area. You can type in DFW Metroplex and show a whole bunch of quilt squares will come up from people who have made them from here. You can do organizations, you can do years, all of these things. You can look at them and see the care that is put into them. Now, of course, in they were the AIDS quilt was unfurled for the first time at um, the second LGBT march on Washington. What year was that? Was it 89, 92, something? We're historians. We don't know years. Um, but it was unfurled, and they did a ceremony, because they would so they're by 3 by 6, and then they would tape or sew together to make a 15 by 12 or 12 by 12, I think it was, block, 12 foot by 12 foot, so it's 4 across and 2 down, right? So eight blocks together, and then they folded them together up. And then in the unfurling on the National Mall at that march, the National Mall right between the Capitol and the Washington Monument, um, they had a ceremony where they read out the names of the people as volunteers were unfurling them, and there were just crowds of people who were just sobbing, as you can imagine, as their loved ones' names were read out, and then walking through this, because it was several thousand, it was over 1,000 um, uh, squares that they unfurled. It's like 1,932 or something like that. And they were just walking through on the National Mall all day, just looking at that and weeping. And I've interviewed a bunch of people who had been to that 1987. Thank you. Oh, good Lord. Um, so thank you, Samantha. And I've interviewed several people with oral history interviews who were at that march, um, and they said that was like one of the most moving things, and to be able to mourn publicly and mourn as a community was very important in their being able to overcome the devastation to the community of the AIDS crisis. And yeah, it's out of the community that Harvey Milk built in San Francisco that we get that. And so he's very important to LGBT history, even though I I guess I'm not doing a great job, because a lot of my students, I was like, we're going to talk about milk, and they're like, it's a movie about milk, and I was like, Harvey Milk, and they're like, I don't know who that is. So, um, we'll try to get better here. Yeah, he's very important to the history of the LGBT movement. And there are Harvey Milk schools, just like there are schools that have the name of other civil rights leaders, Cesar Chavez and MLK. Harvey Milk is kind of analogous to that in the LGBT community. Um, so yeah, his reach is far beyond the few years that he was working. So yes.
I just really loved and I think that this is a great kind of thing to talk about the AIDS cult, and that is seeing the outpouring of grief that people have in the ways that people do that publicly. And I think the march at the end of the movie, seeing it on the movie, and then seeing the actual footage of that, it just, to me, it's such a touching and moving thing to see how people come together to remember people who impacted them and who they loved. And I think that that's something that you were just mentioning, that, and the importance of marches, of any ways that communities can come together and either demand for change or celebrate or mourn somebody, and through these quilts and through these kind of, I think, public, but also the ways that communities come together. And I really love that part. And I was telling, when I was watching this, I was saying, I hope that we do not lose that, because nowadays you can maybe just check in on social media and say that. And I was saying, I hope we don't lose that as a society, to still come together in real, and I know here we are virtually saying, oh, we need to come together. I get the irony of it, but I do think that it's still important, and I hope that we still, as humans, do that still. And yeah, so that was just kind of my thoughts as I was kind of wrapping that up with the movie and with the quilt and with all of that.
Yeah, and I don't think we can use that, because there's no substitute for that. I mean, this is fun, and if this is the only thing that we can do, I mean, like during COVID, it's good that we had this capability to visit with each other and see each other and all of that. But I mean, and people were like, "Oh, if people can just go school online, why will people why would anybody um why on earth would anybody go into school anymore?" But you see that students are returning to the college campuses because it's better. You learn better. I know. I'm sorry, Chloe. Uh, but some people learn better, and but it's nice to have this accommodation for people who can't do that, and who learn better in a virtual environment, and to have both available, right? And it's important to have like these kind of meetings, but it's also important, for like, if we wanted to like schedule a march, we're going to have a meeting like this first and then show up somewhere, but both parts are important, because we have to plan and do all of that stuff in a meeting like environment that we can do here, and then show up on the streets to show people, because there's nothing like that visual of of look at all those people. I mean,
Mhm.
just remember some of the more recent marches that have happened, where people showed up because um you know uh people died or something, and they're like, all right, or no, the Dobbs decision, and people showed up in massive numbers, and they had helicopters or whatever taking a picture, and you could see all the people for blocks and blocks away, and it's like, whoa. And they could show you a zoom screen with like all these millions of different squares, and it doesn't have the same effect as pulling up from the buildings and being like, gosh, that's a lot of people, so it is important that we continue to have those moments, because it's important to get things done. That visual representation of human beings is far more powerful than little squares on a screen
Yes.
representing numbers,
And speaking of Dr. Wisely, this afternoon, you and I will both be going to
mhm,
celebrate someone in person as well. So yes,
mhm, mhm.
who also had a great impact for us on our education
Yeah, yeah,
and the
yes, we will.
LGBT movement as well. So I feel
Mhm.
like it's kind of all coming together today.
Yeah, yeah, it is, yeah. and I'm sure she would be immensely proud of the work that we're doing here to have these kind of things available for our students. And so, yeah, we are continuing the work of Dr. Marilyn Morris. Yeah. So, all right. Well, I did want to, Samantha posted the attendance thing. I also want to post in here the watch wisely. Let's see. I think that's it. Yeah.
And also, if you are here this summer, we will be doing another movie discussion this summer. I know for many that is not, you were gone in the summer, and that is lovely. But if you are around and taking classes and want to join us, I am putting the information in here as well. I hope the links work. Yes, it'll be on June 16. And we are going to be discussing the movie The Children's Hour. And hopefully Samantha could join us, but she is not on contract, so she does not have to. It's a choice for her. Yes. So yes, hopefully you will join us.
Have you watched it yet, Chloe?
I have not. No, have you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did. Samantha, would you like to tell her my reaction to it?
I came out one day and
is it one
Karen
of
just looked
those?
like really depressed. And I
Oh,
was like,
boy. Okay, I need to be in like the right like
Samantha's
mindset.
like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, I just watched this movie.
I'm like, Karen, can we do a happy ending movie? That's my
I
request
don't
for
even know if
next
that's
year.
possible.
And next fall, we've already talked about talking about Selena too, and that's also sad. Okay, yeah, maybe we need some happier movie at some point.
So students who are here or who watch this later, please message us and contact us with ideas for maybe some uplifting movie.
Yeah.
Life affirming movies.
Yes.
That's what we're looking for. Yes.
Right. Well, thank you so much for having me today, Dr. Wisely. And I'm glad that we were able to discuss this movie, and I was able to learn more about your own research and about these really powerful subject from you.
Hey, it's anytime I can talk about my research, I'm happy. So thanks everybody for being here. Before we go, does anybody anybody else have any questions or any comments that you'd like to make before we adjourn? Open it up to the floor, as it were. The three other people who are here that don't have their cameras on. All right, we'll give you 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, then we're gonna close it. And thanks for joining us. And be on the lookout next semester for more of these. We think they're fun. We hope you have fun. Check out the Watch Wisely podcast. And get ready for June. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. We'll see you.
Thank you guys for coming.